welcome everyone to this next broadcast of Unusual Attitudes. Today I've got a really special guest and someone, normally on Unusual Attitudes, what we've been doing is talking to a lot of domain experts, in technology and HR and recruiting and retention. And we're going to branch out today and go into something that I'm quite passionate about, which is music and entertainment and arts and creativity. Not that those things don't exist in the corporate world, but really diving into someone that I've had some experience in working with the past, and really dive into why and what makes creatives think the way that they think, how they view the world. And so we're going to get into it. So with that, welcome Andrew Lipke to the Unusual Attitudes podcast.
Thanks, Cliff. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yep. So, just dive right into it. And I think what the question that I always ask in the beginning is, who is Andrew Lipke? Tell us who you are.
So you were kind enough to send me that question ahead of time, and I was thinking about it, and the answer that occurred to me was, "Who's asking?" Because when I think about that, it's not one answer really. I think that's probably true for a lot of people in the context of as we get older and we sort of wear more hats and have more responsibilities, expectations, kind of priorities switch, and definitely having children. If my children ask me who I am, that's a completely different question than somebody who might be hiring me for a creative endeavor. And then in another way, it also kind of changes internally from day to day. I think the probably simplest answer, other than the sort of cheeky one of who's asking, is that I'm he's a work in progress. He's trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. So I still don't know. I don't know if I ever will. I think that I think my kind of initial reaction to a question like that, who is kind of a static word in a way. It's kind of a stagnant idea that something is what it is, and therefore it has become what it's going to become. And for me, none of those things really ring true. I'm having the experience that I'm sure a lot of people do as they get through their 40s and sort of starting to move into the middle of middle age, is I look in the mirror and I'm like, who is this dude? I'm still like 12 or 13 years old, So there's a sort of convoluted answer to the question, but there's no answer. The answer changes. It's a fluid. Andrew Lipke is whoever Andrew Lipke is today.
Right. Yeah, and I it's such almost a deep philosophical question that we ask of ourselves, and I don't know that anyone can answer it, but I think from my experience with you, just so that the audience knows, I mean, we spent a little bit of time together. I wouldn't say that we, deeply work together, but we've had some shared experiences, and we've been running in some similar circles. Or your circle around the music stuff is a lot bigger than mine, but I guess maybe look at it from that lens. I think as a musician, who is Andrew Lipke might be a better way of posing that question.
Certainly. I am drawn to music that moves me, and I have a hard time compartmentalizing internally the sort of differences between one kind of music and musical expression and another. So I think that there's a big part of that defines who I am as a musician, which is that I don't see there being very rigid lines of division between different modes of musical expression. And I think that kind of core aspect of my relationship with music has informed a lot of the work that I've done. Um, so that's probably something that maybe sets me apart from some people. I don't sort of consider myself to be any one kind of a musician. There's things that I do better than others and things that I've drawn towards, but I have the same love and respect and deep emotional connection and also interest and curiosity about a very wide range of types of musical expression.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of framing a career, right? Like you could look at it and you could say, for myself, if someone were to ask me what kind of musician I am, I've really focused on a particular genre. We're around the progressive rock era and deeply influenced. And that's the thing that for me, I love to express myself through as a drummer, as a percussionist. Through my influences is a better way of for me to describe it. So that it's not so that I can understand it. It's almost so that I can help other people understand, how I view, in this case, my musicianship, and because you always, and I'm going to ask you the question. Probably a good time to ask that question. In terms of being a musician, people always like to understand who your influences are, and I think you probably have many. And we could talk about Bach, and we could talk about Zeppelin. We can talk about. I mean, so there's a long list, but from your point of view as a musician, if you were asked that question, like where is your influence coming from, to help others understand, because we want to categorize people, right?
Sure.
We want to understand their world a little bit, so there has to be some relationship to things that we can understand. How would you answer that question?
Um, I've been asked it before, so it's kind of easy for me to sort of fall back on what I've said in the past, which is, Bach, Beethoven, Metallica, Pink Floyd, these kind of, a lot of the reason for these sort of big influences in my life, a lot of it is just happenstance, a lot of it's circumstantial. Like the Metallica, Pink Floyd was because I was 12 years old on a Boy Scout camp, and one of the other older kids who I, looked up to and thought was super cool lent me his Walkman, and there was two tapes. It was Master of Puppets, and it was The Wall, and so it's like that. Now I was lucky because that's great music. I don't know if I was drawn to the quality of the music and the sort of all the aspects of that makes kind of sense in my mind. Like if I think of Master of Puppets as a Metallica record, there's so many sort of classical elements to it. It's very kind of operatic and intense in its um, span and sort of the kind of risk taking that there is musically there, and a big long instrumental piece in the tune Orion that's there on the second side. It's like that blew my mind. It sounds like all sort of Bach music all the way in the middle of this Metallica, and that to me was just incredible. But I don't know. So I feel like to me that's something that exists inside me, but I don't know how influential that was just because it happened to be the tape that happened to be in the Walkman that happened to be lent to me when I was exactly at that perfect age. Um, but for me, I I can say that there are distinct moments of in my memory that are influential with particular pieces of music. A lot of them are just kind of like sort of pop songs, like that I heard as a kid that just really affected me. And when I look back on them, a lot of them were very kind of expansive and sort of more grand and kind of like Bohemian Rhapsody-ish, as opposed to sort of more kind of straightforward. So I clearly was drawn to kind of an epic, a grand expression, and I was also drawn to beauty and things that made me feel some strong emotional reaction. So there was the music in my dad's church that I remember hearing as a child, which I think a lot of that is just hymns, which a lot of those are Handel, some of them are Bach, some of them are just traditional melodies. But I was really drawn to that music as a child, and was also really drawn to the more heavy kind of rock and roll, like interesting stuff. As far as specific influences, Definitely Pink Floyd is a big one. Zeppelin, a relatively big one, although much later, because it wasn't until I joined Get the Let Out that I really learned the catalog and kind of was as immersed as I ended up becoming. Um, Bach, super early on, probably the first was hearing Bach music. Um, and then Nirvana was a huge influence because it was right around the time, like I was 12 when Nevermind came out. So it was like exactly the right time, for me. Tool was a big influence because it was the first time I heard music that I really felt like was scary music. It actually scared me. And I was looking for that. Like I was desperate for music that actually scared me. And I would see Iron Maiden posters and be like, wow, that's got to be scary music. And I heard it. I'm like, this is not scary. This is like silly. Like it didn't act, nothing scary. And then I heard Tool and I was like, this is scary friggin' music. Like something dark is happening right here. Um, and then I remember hearing Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture at a 4th of July um, concert. And I was like, I want to conduct orchestras. Like after
Is
I hear
that,
this.
let's talk about the musical journey, because I think, I would, it's so funny you mentioned Iron Maiden, and so music has this great quality about itself that it's almost like a great food that you ate, or something that you smelled, and you can remember it years and years later.
Mm-hmm.
Music, I don't know why, maybe you could explain it, but it just resonates for most human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Music is something that helps us remember very special moments, some sad, some very happy, others just, an experience that we're having. For you connected with music very, very early. I don't think a lot of people do it at that depth of emotion.
Mm.
When did you know that you wanted to go beyond being a listener, and you wanted to create and play music?
I think I think I knew I wanted to make music right from the beginning. Um, I don't think I had a conception of the idea of making my own music. Like I didn't necessarily, I wasn't at a point where like, well, I want to play something that I came up with. I think it was more, I wanted to be more than just listening music. Like when I heard, I think it was Solfeggetto, or like a sort of very well-known, simple CPE Bach piece of music. I say simple, but it sounds very complex and really super fancy. And when I heard that as a kid, I didn't have the reaction, "Oh, I wanna hear that again." I was like, "I wanna play that." I wanna make that. So I had that right from the get-go. As far as that turning into, I wanna make my own music, I wanna sort of express myself in some way and kinda create my own notes, that probably didn't start happening until maybe 12, 13 years old. A lot of that came from picking up a guitar. Um, and then sort of a constant curiosity and wanting to kind of understand more ways of doing that turned into all the sort of classical type stuff that I spend a lot of time doing these days. But and it wasn't until very, very late. It wasn't until almost like really second half of junior year of high school that I even thought about the idea of going and getting a degree in music or trying to find some way to make it a living.
So, like, was the guitar your first real instrument, or was it something else?
It was piano.
So piano. So you started, and I would assume, just being exposed to a lot of the classics, that you were studying that early on before you started to moving into other genres, or is that not true?
Well, I tried, but I'm a terrible classical pianist, like just horrible. Like I've tried for years and years to get past a point of even passable. And it's one of the things that probably frustrates me because I understand the music, but it just doesn't come through me in that way. I don't have the discipline or tenacity to I always want to change the notes, I always want to kind of like do something a little bit different, or I'm just like, that'll be fine. Like I definitely see instruments as sort of a means to an end. And I have a lot of envy and what's the word? Sort of like sense of personal failure. Like when I think about other instrumentalists that are at such a high level on their instrument, and I know these people. And so I like, there's people who look at me, they're like, oh, you're incredible. You can play this so great. But it's like, no, no, no. I know the really good people who, and they're incredible. But I mean, I think it's a natural inclination to sort of pass over the things that we excel at and kind of just focus on the ones that we fall short on, or at least for me it is. But with the guitar, so I did the piano first, and it was kind of a struggle. And then when we moved to this country from South Africa, it was a big sort of hiccup because I left the teacher. I didn't have lessons for like 2 years, and it was kind of like, and I started just sort of doing my own thing. But when I picked up the guitar, it felt a little bit more like a world that I fit in with, because especially electric guitar, because the electric guitar, the whole history of the electric guitar is untrained musicians and people doing things quote unquote incorrectly. The greatest electric guitar god played it upside down and backwards. So it's like the whole sort of core of it, and I think I connected with that. Even at the same time, so much of what I do now, especially lately, is I'm the one who's like, no, it needs to be done this way. This is how I wrote it, and that's the way it needs to be done. So it's a fascinating kind of juxtaposition. But as a performer, I always wanted to make music, yes. And then as far as writing my own music, it was so much more accessible sort of with the guitar, wanting to write songs. And then that really started happening in an intense way in high school.
So you go to high school, and you're becoming better at guitar, but that leads to you being good enough, at least in your own skill, to say like you want to explore writing. And you leave high school and you went to Curtis, right?
I did not. No,
Oh,
I didn't go to Curtis. No, I went to University Arts.
University Arts.
No
So
worries.
I think which is no longer here, right?
No longer there. Yeah.
Yeah, they just closed shop. But when you leave high school and you sort of immerse yourself in a school for the arts. I went to Creative Performing Arts in Philly High School, not a not a university or college. But I remember making that transition, from middle school into an arts environment, and I just remember like the imposter syndrome in myself
Oh yeah.
became insane. I'm like, I definitely do not deserve, even though I had auditioned, and clearly, when you audition to get into school, they're very selective. So at least I guess that's some level of accomplishment. But then you get there and you go, wait a minute, like I think they don't remember my audition. And I don't like,
Yeah.
do I deserve to be, like, did you have that? Like, going there and being surrounded probably by some amazing artists, like whether they were visual artists, vocal, instrumental, whatever it might be. What were you feeling at that time? Was it culture shock for you?
100%. I mean, I still the imposter syndrome feeling is still a very real thing. It's kind of like the sort of self-doubt and feelings of insecurity that I think I used to think I'd eventually not have. I used to think like eventually with like, oh sure, I'm gonna get older and I'm gonna get like, gray hair and wrinkles. But the good thing is all of these sort of things that seem like they're childish feelings will go away. And now, of course, I'm realizing they don't go away. You just learn how to deal with them, or you learn that they won't ever go away. You learn that they don't go away. Like, and so that's part of sort of the management. But absolutely, I mean, when I went to the first, I was very confident as a kid, which I think really helped. I was very confident in high school, and I'm still relatively confident. But I have the sort of reality of having experience that if you're if you're self-aware to a certain degree, then it should make you humble in the face of reality. But back then, I was very, very confident. But I remember taking the like theory entrance thing, and I was like, "I don't know any of this stuff." I was, like, looking around and watching people filling in the things, and I'm like, and I didn't. I mean, when I think about knowing what I know now and knowing how little I knew then, I'm surprised that they even let me in, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, not that I'm aware of my natural, musical gifts, but as far as just having the awareness of it, like, I didn't know my key signatures, I didn't know my modes, I didn't know the sort of terminology that you're supposed to know, but by the 2nd semester, I was in advanced theory and I was tutoring people. So, like, it all made total sense, I just had never been given it. So I'd never had any of that growing up and didn't have anything in the high school. So once I got it, it clicked instantly and I was like, "Oh, this is wonderful. I love it." And I was like very, very excited about it. But the feeling I remember stepping outside after that test and being like, "I am in the wrong place." Like they're gonna find after they get that thing, they're gonna be like, are you sure you're not like a pottery major?"
Yeah, I had that same feeling, and I always felt like, there, even though I didn't really know it at the time, I just had this sense of being surrounded by greatness,
Mm,
which I mean, in my experience, turned out to be true. Being around, someone like Amir Thompson, who the world knows now as Questlove. The Roots was born in my school, as well as the Boys to Men, which obviously wildly popular at the time in terms of pop music and R&B. And I could name a dozen other world famous musicians, just in terms of my discipline. And you just go, I could never. And I remember saying this to myself, I could never be that invested. And I was a fairly good musician. At least I thought I was good enough to be there and play and somewhat make a living out of it in my early years. But these people were just on a wildly different level. Like
mhm.
I don't even know how to describe it. Just like they eat, breathe, sleep, just music and entertaining, and you could just tell with certain people. And I did get that sense being for the short period of time that I've observed your career. I do get that sense because I see how you interact with the musicians around you, and and the people just in the music business. And I think there's just a natural affinity and a trust there. And I want to dig into that a little bit and maybe start with what happens after you get done university arts. And we talk a little bit about one of the things that you're just obviously well known for is being in the tribute band Get the Lead Out, Led Zeppelin tribute band. And what I really want to understand is, how do you remain authentic to the music and reinterpret in some ways the Zeppelin experience, without just being someone who's mimicking their every move or everything. It's sort of I don't know that that's easy to do. Like you can almost be your own self and musician, represent your skill and the way that you view that music, and sound authentic, but not exactly mimic like a Jimmy Page or or Robert Plant or whomever it is. Like, how do you remain authentic when you're playing somebody else's music?
Well, it wasn't so hard in Get the Let Out because right off the bat, the project is very clear about not being an impersonator show. So it's not, there are shows where you go and part of what they're trying to do is sort of recreate the experience of going and seeing Led Zeppelin in 1970, whatever. And when I was in that project, and still today, they're the same way, there's 6 members in the band. So right off the bat, it's not Zeppelin. And there's no sort of pretense that it is Zeppelin. And part of the reason why is because the idea behind that particular band and the way that they present it is a lot more similar to, um, there's a project called Classic Albums Live. There's an Australian Pink Floyd, Brit Floyd. There's a couple of other bands where the idea is they just want to make it sound like the record, but in a live setting. So everything that you're used to hearing from the recording is recreated, but in a live situation. And so I found that interesting right off the bat, just because I don't see that being very different from a classical musical presentation, or going and see, if you want to go see like Hamilton, right? Hamilton's coming to Philadelphia and playing in whatever theater. Those aren't the people that wrote Hamilton. It's not Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's not even the people from Broadway. Doesn't matter. Like, they're going to come and they're going to play it in the best possible way they can do it. If Frank Sinatra is singing, Night and Day, he didn't write it. He's not even like, well, hey guys, I'm going to sing a song I didn't write. He didn't write most of his songs. In fact, he didn't write My Way. It's like, so it's not about whether you wrote it. I don't think that really matters. I think that that's like a interesting, crazy effect that Bob Dylan and the Beatles have had on all of pop music, which is now if you don't write the song, somehow it's not your song and you can't actually, like, that's not the case, and it's still not the case in very, very popular music. Stuff that really takes, you have the Taylor Swifts, and you have the people who are at the top of popular music who do write their own music or co-write it. But there's plenty of the people who don't, and it doesn't matter. So now that's obviously different than being a tribute band, but the idea behind the reason it was easy for me to be authentic is that the thing that I love to do, I love doing music, and I have an answer to the thing you said earlier, by the way, which I'll have to get to. But as far as like, I have a not an answer. I have a hypothesis for why music affects people in the way it does. But it was easy for me to be authentic because one of my favorite thing to do is music. But my favorite thing to do, more specifically, if you took all kind of the specifics out of it, is problem solve. Like, that's what I really like to do. I like to try to solve the problem, but I get so much more satisfaction with music because when the problem is solved, it's beautiful music, and I'm just like, well, that's the best result of the problem solving. I like problem solving, like when I built my studio. It's fun to solve problems that way too. How are you going to run the electric? How are you going to, like, how are you going to try? But that's just not as satisfying when it's finished, and
Right.
plus it's like the process is just as tedious, but there's just aspects to it where you don't, it's like, but so with Get the Lead Out, the problem was, this is what it sounds like on the recording. And it was an especially fascinating problem with Led Zeppelin because they never played anything the same way twice. The recording that they have, except for maybe something like maybe the Rain song or something that's a little bit more orchestrated, for the most part, what you got on the recording was the one version they did that they decided to keep. Like, if you found the alternate version of Since I've Been Loving You, it's going to be totally different. A different guitar solo, different bass line, different vocals, different drum beat. Everything's going to be different. Everything. They played it one time, and that's the way. But ironically, this one time that became the recording is so well known by people, it might as well be written down note for note. And so, being somebody who's fascinated by classical music, like, I'm very fascinated by the different ways music can live. And one of the ways that's most interesting to me is on the page, because music on the page is, in some ways, the most perfect music because it doesn't exist. It's just the blueprint for the music. And it doesn't exist in sound unless you can create the sound in your mind, unless you have that relationship with the written music. And every time it does exist, it's only some version of what's on the page, because what's on the page can't exist, because the second it becomes real, it's not quite exactly right. There's something that's going to be a little bit altered, a little bit different. It's like the sort of Platonian form of forms, right? It's like on the page, that's the perfect representation of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And the reason people keep playing it is because it can't ever be done. It's only there, and where it is doesn't sound like anything. So with Zeppelin, the interesting thing is, how do you take this thing that is meant to be improvisatory, has now become sealed, like friggin' Han Solo in Return of the Jedi, Um, and like you need to take it and then remake it live again. And so it needs to sound exactly the same. And we would even cop the mistakes. Like there are great mistakes in Zeppelin, and we would do them live. But you have to do them, and you're chasing this ridiculous um, holy grail of reproducing it in a way that feels improvisatory, but still has every little tiny thing that everybody who is a huge Zeppelin fan knows. And the thing that really is the most interesting is the vocals, because like I don't know how much of a Zeppelin fan you are, but one of my favorite Zeppelin tunes since being in Get the Light Out is called Night Flight, right? And you know Plant is he's insane. He's just doing the wackiest stuff, right? And it's just like but everybody in the audience knows everything. And he just did that the one time. He's just trying to imitate Janis Joplin. He's just trying to see, how can I be as ridiculous as possible? He's not planning any of this out. And these people know every little, like the last verse, he's like, I just saw a picture of a baby with a baby, said a baby had a very, very, very special smile. And it's like all these, it was like when he goes, he's like, ooh, come on, meet me in the morning, could you meet me in the middle of the night, night. Like, and he's doing all this crazy stuff, and everybody in the audience knows every single little guttural, and all the stuff. They know exactly where it goes, they know exactly how it sounds, and it's like, that's just really fascinating to me. So it was very authentic. Once I got at first when I joined, I was kind of just sort of taking a back seat. Like I was just watching, because I was much younger than everybody who was in there. So I was just kind of watching them do it. And then there was a moment where, I realized what they were trying to do. And my mind was thinking more like an arranger, like, like as far as, and I'm like, well, if you want this to sound like that, then you need to think about how it was recorded, and you need to do it that way. And everybody needs to kind of drop the idea that I'm the lead guitar player and I'm this guitar player and I'm the that guitar player, because it doesn't matter. You just got to do whatever's, like sometimes in the orchestra, the trumpet player sits there for, 25 minutes,
Right.
but then they play, and it's the most important part, so it's like you have to think about it that way. And when it became apparent, then it was very authentic for me, because that's what I excel at. So I was able to really kind of help find the best way to solve that problem, to sort of accomplish that thing.
What do you think, when I look back on it, and I didn't do nearly as much touring. I mean, the talk about touring with Get the Let Out, and even for the short time that I did it, there was a point where it just wore on me really fast. Not in playing a show in front today, even, there's nothing better to me than playing a show. I don't care if it's one person or 10,000 people, it's irrelevant. Just being the gratitude that I have for anyone that's willing to listen to me play anything is deeply moving. But just the grind. So many musicians that have toured have just said, just the absolute grind of it is what wore them down. But what was your experience touring? Like, how long did you tour with Get the Let Out, and what was that experience like?
I was in the band for about 12 years, but it really wasn't a touring band. Maybe the last 8, like 6, 7, 8 years. And really it wasn't heavy touring, maybe last like 5, 6 years. So it was a long road to that point. And it was ups and downs, a lot of times really fun. Certainly I had lots of amazing times, and definitely a lot of frustrating times. For me, it was definitely time to stop touring because of family, because of a little too much Zeppelin, because I was starting to become stuck in unhealthy habits. Um, and honestly, the thing that's most unappetizing about touring is the downtime. That's really it. It's like, it sounds ridiculous, but it's like, I'm not really good with leisure time. I should be better at it, but I like to do stuff. But I wasn't as disciplined as some people are in the context of being able to like be really productive on the road. I would always say that I was going to be, and sometimes I was, but it really is just so much downtime. You're either traveling or you're waiting. The show is like two hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes, maybe, and then maybe a half an hour sound check. So you're basically working, quote unquote, for 3 hours a day. And then the rest of the time, you're just waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really frustrating, and even in sort of the corporate world that I live in now, and I've this year I've done over a 250,000 air miles.
Oh my
And I
God.
always say, I got to have all the lounge passes. I always have a comfortable place to go and actually get some work done. And I try to, I really, really do. But my best work by far is right where I am right now.
Yeah, right.
Being in my own ecosystem, my own environment, and I have lots of distractions here because, you have young kids. I've got young kids, married, and so there's a life outside of work. But even with those distractions, I almost welcome them. I also welcome my kids being in the background, and making noise, even when I'm on a meeting, because I don't. It's just it's comfort food to me. I know where I'm supposed to be, and when I'm out of that environment, I'm wildly unproductive. Until I get in front of I get up on stage and I start talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, all that fun stuff. And that's a 45-minute to an hour gig. But everything in between, I agree. It's just I don't know what to do with my time because I'm just not where I'm supposed to be, and it's a big part of I think adulting, as they say,
Yeah, right.
is trying to manage a way through that, because idle hands are not good for me either. I developed some bad habits over the years, which I've since shed, but I think that's an important piece. I think it leads you to what you're doing now, which is I would be very remiss if we didn't talk about your original work that you worked on, and I listen to I'm a great fan of your work, by the way. I think your it's the Plague Siddhartha. I think hugely important to me. There are many reasons why, but I think there are philosophical reasons. But like it just seems to me like your original work, you're really drawn to some very profound themes, and I want to know why. I've actually never asked you this, like why go so deep?
Why not?
Good as answer as any, right?
um, I'm clearly not trying to get the to try to top the top of the pops, So
Right.
it's like not that I would argue with that. I mean, sure, I mean, I have no problem with it. Um, I think why does why is a painter drawn to paint a certain thing, or why is a writer drawn to write about a certain thing? And so I don't really know. I guess again, if I were to try to self-analyze, I've always been drawn to the sort of epic things, the things that are trying to like delve deep and
Do you
try to sort
think
of.
in a way that like I think to something that you said earlier around, especially Pink Floyd, who just have these really epic arrangements, and some of them are quite long, but it's not really the length of anything. It's just the desire, I think, in a lot of ways, to explore how far can we take this theme, this music, this arrangement. And I get that deep sense with your music. It's almost like you're in a way trying to take the listener through this conceptual journey, however they hear it, which is a really great thing about music, is that we can all hear it differently. um, but and I don't think it's forced or intentional. I just think it is. I just get that sense with you. Am I hitting on something with you? It's just that there is a sense of journey and exploration and curiosity in your music that you want to put out there and see what kind of reaction you get from someone who's listening to it.
I think the only thing where that isn't correct is probably to my own kind of to the detriment of the wider awareness of my original music. I very rarely have anybody but myself in mind. So, I'm really making it for myself, and so I'm sort of making the music I want to hear. Um, I don't, and that's a big reason why I'm just not a very good promoter of it, because once it's done and I feel like I've gotten what I want it to be, I don't have the stomach to go out and tell people about it.
Do you think it's sort of interesting you're saying that, because I it's one of the things that when I'm talking to people about sort of my day job, right? Around, technology and working in this space, one of the pieces of advice I give is like you have to do this work for yourself. You have to. Like,
Mhm.
I'm fortunate enough, and I think you are as well, that there is an audience for the things that we talk about, that we perform. um but at the end of the day, I almost feel like if I'm not given a deadline for something, I'll never finish it, because
Mm.
I'm just so trying to get to some level of mental perfection with my work. I mean, do you find that to be, a challenge for you? Like, when is enough for you, that you're ready to go, okay, I feel good about this? Like, do you set a time limit on things? And, is it good advice to tell people, like, you have to be, you have to be your biggest fan of your own work before anyone else can be?
I think so. I think that, things have changed. Like when I was releasing my own music in 2007, 2008, 2009, I had ideas of touring and becoming a sort of touring independent artist. But I was doing lots of other things at the same time, and then as my life progressed, it 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 seemed like other things were more viable and made more sense. Um, and so I tend to go with the flow as much as possible. Like I find that life has more interesting ideas than I do about what I should do next. So I kind of like just which can sometimes be hair raising for my wife and people around me and for myself as well. But so far so good. But at times when I felt like there was a demand, or when I was working with other people who were invested in trying to raise awareness of my music, then I would feel a bit more pressure to try to complete things and get things done on time. I don't have the same issue of not knowing when I'm finished, which I guess I'm lucky about. That's how I'm able to release stuff. Like I tend to be able to have I've had the feeling enough when I am either listening to or whatever it is that I'm doing to sort of take stock of whatever I've created, and I just can feel when it's where it needs to be, um, and also can feel when it's not. And some things definitely take longer than others. Some things don't. I have many of things that I've started that I haven't finished, but I do have a lot of stuff that's finished and probably ready to release. I think some. I still hold on to the idea of an album in a weird way, or at least a collection of songs, which I've been a little bit better at releasing this here or releasing that there. But I love the idea of a kind of unified experience connected to some sort of extra musical idea. And so, I'm working on one of those, which I'm hoping to release in March now, um, connected to AI, by the way. Um, but I don't have a problem knowing when I'm done. Sometimes it'll take me a long time. A lot of that is because of distractions and
Yeah.
kids and things that I have to do for money, But um, but no, I
Well,
think. Sorry, go ahead.
no, what it's going to say, knowing what you're, so your career has, continued to progress, and into, I think, what you have described in the past as sort of being this goal, like where you want to be, and as you develop as a musician, as an artist, as a composer, and now as a conductor, when you talk about, creating these arrangements, for orchestra, for symphony, there is I think a huge sense of responsibility, right? That maybe, you know, I don't know that someone can just jump into, say, so right out of university or right out of school. To talk about the progression of being, someone who is now, orchestrating and conducting. I mean, what does that look like? Because that is not something that every musician aspires to be. And
No.
I imagine that's sort of that's very ambitious, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fascinating thing, it's definitely one of the things that keeps, it's definitely a source of the struggle to come up with the answer of that question of who's Andrew Lipke, because it keeps me young, because to start doing something professionally that's as intense as that at this level is it's just so much to learn. I mean, it's just I have so far to go before I'm even at the kind of baseline of being able to have awareness of certain things. Um, I've been orchestrating for a while, and I've gotten pretty confident in at least the things that are. I mean, orchestration is like it's so much of it is technical and syntax, and kind of like just making sure that those things are taken care of, because all of that is so important before any of the artistic stuff is able to actually be represented. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so kind of intense to think about, and probably makes people say, no, let somebody else deal with that, because there's so many things that could go wrong before you even start talking about what specific notes you chose and like how you decided to, divvy them up in the orchestra and so on and so forth. So I guess I'm drawn to overly ambitious things. And I tend to do it to myself. I just finished a thing for Halloween where was commissioned to write a show, but initially it was just like there was just write some songs for this Halloween show. We're only gonna have one rehearsal, and it's the day of the show. And I ended up doing two like nonstop 40-minute acts of nonstop music. It was like 2,000 measures, and I only had 2 hours to rehearse it, and then we actually do the show. And I have this thing that happens every time. My wife will tell you, I'll be like, "This is not gonna work." I'm like, "I've screwed it up. There's no way this is gonna work." I'll like do it all and I'll get all the parts. I'm like, "It's not gonna work." She's like, "It's gonna work." I'm like, "It's not gonna work. There's no way it's gonna work." And then it works. Great. It doesn't stop me from the next time being like, "This is not gonna work. There's no way that this is gonna work." And my wife would be like, "It's gonna work. It worked last time." I'm like, "I don't know. I know that was last time, but this time is not gonna work." And then sure enough, it works. So it's like, I don't know.
There's
Maybe I'm like
that
trying to
imposter
sabotage myself.
syndrome just creeping back
Always.
up
Yeah, always.
into all that work. And what is that like, in terms of conducting? That's you've moved into that, sort of full steam, along with all the other work that you're doing. But what I'm interested to know what it's like to stand in front of, some of the, most highly trained and talented musicians in the world, and command them. Like, how do you gain their respect? You've talked about that a little bit. There are some conductors that everyone has a sort of a different methodology, different reputation, different attitude towards things. What is yours that that gives you the confidence that you can gain the respect of world-class musicians?
Well, I try not to think about it too much.
Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. I think one of the benefits that I have is most of the time when I'm conducting, I've written the orchestrations. So one of the things that and I'm pretty decent at it, and I get a lot of recognition from the musicians, because in the context of a lot of the stuff that I'm conducting, the arrangements are oftentimes kind of boring and not really musician centered, and mine are very much about the orchestra. They showcase the musicians. I'm very intense about my parts looking great and being easy to read, as well as trying to give everybody, I want the orchestra to be the featured thing here, because why have an orchestra if you're not going to feature the orchestra? And so for I've done enough of them now where I can recognize, like, some of the players who played my arrangements a lot, like, talk about these Lipkeisms, and like things that like I tend to do in my arrangements that they like and like they connect with, because they have this classical sensibility to them, but presented in a way that is sort of accessible and kind of exciting and fun that pop music brings.
Did you
You
ever
know,
think I think it's a really interesting point. Did you ever think about that like you have these sort of markers about your own style that I mean, is that something that you experience? I mean, you can obviously with the classics, it's probably easy. Just like with a painting, you look at a type of brushstroke and you go, that's a
Yeah.
Monet or that's Picasso.
Yeah.
Like, but did you ever think you would have that level of fingerprint that
No.
others would pick up on?
No, I didn't. And it's funny, but I have like I will like because recently I've done so much like orchestrating. I think by the end of this year I will have orchestrated somewhere between 60 and 70 um, separate pieces of music, and so just doing that much work, you're just kind of doing it, and and it's like the whole idea of like, oh, I have to wait for inspiration. That's not even a thing. That's not it. I have these many hours, and I need to get this thing done. So it's like so you just work and work and work and work and occasionally I'll go back and I won't notice it when it's happening, but I'll give you an example of a Lipkeism, which I noticed. And my friend Dana, who was concert master, she's a good friend of mine, played with me many. She's played in my string quartet for many years, and then she just came down and was concert master for this show. I tend to not want to start melodies on the beat. I always want to start them after the beat.
Right.
So, and it's like, I don't think about that when I'm doing it. But like, so for instance, let's say there's some melody and I could easily go like, da 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 dee da 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 dee dee da da. Let's say I could do that. I would go da 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 dee da 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 dee dee da da. I would make that first thing be a rest.
Just a brief pause.
Yeah. So instead of being a dee da 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 da, it's da 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 da. And like I do this all the friggin' time. And if somebody's gonna come apart, if somebody's gonna have a part that starts right on a thing, like let's say their part's gonna be like dee da da, like this part, I go da 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 dee da da. Like I'll put 3 notes in front of it, or I'll put 4 notes, like not 4 because 4 would be on the beat, so it'll be 3 or 7 or 9 or whatever. It'll be like something, and I don't think about when I'm doing it. Or if there's a rhythmic thing that there's this song that I have from the play called Hosanna, and it has this one particular viola part that was always a struggle for violists to play because they're never on the beat. The part goes da 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 da, and like it was so hard to find violists who could play this and not slowly start moving it on the beat.
Right. Because everything's in between the beats.
Everything's in between the beat. So and a lot of times classical musicians have a hard time doing that. For instance, one of the tunes that I orchestrated for this Halloween thing was Thriller. And at the end of Thriller, there's this great thing, it's called the frog synth, but it's the whole vamp at the end is dum 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 gum bum, right? And that's the 16th before one and the 16th after one, but not one. So 1 E in a 2 E in a 3 E in a 4 E in a bom bom dun 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 bom bom. So you like the one is not played, and they couldn't get it. They could not get it. Like they could not get it. So it's kind of a hard thing. It's not very common. So anyway, so a lot of it I think just comes from doing it, right? Like the more you do it, because you're you, or I'm me, or one is one, the more you do something, your individual inclination is going to reveal itself. If you don't do it enough, it'll never show up because you won't have enough body of work to be like, oh, there's that thing. Like you have to write whatever, 1 million sentences before somebody's like, oh, that's how you put together your sentence. I see, but it's like it's not going to happen unless you just do just the ridiculous amount of them.
Is that something just in terms of you do work inside the Philadelphia community, teaching music, working with underserved youth? I mean, how are you presenting like a concept like this, a sort of individuality, in that it's repetition and practice, and you got to dedicate time, especially being a musician? I mean, it is. I just remember, for every, 10 hours of practice, I might get 5 minutes of performance. It was like crazy.
Right.
Like,
right.
I mean, how do you encourage youth to stick with it, like, because nobody's, very few, let's put it, there are some prodigies out there, but very few individuals that, especially when you're young and starting music, are good at it. It's pretty horrible.
Yeah.
And how do you encourage and work with youth to stick with it?
Well, I think, the work that I've done with young people has been in the mode of creating and recording music. And some more traditionally minded musicians might think that it's to the detriment of um, the next generation. I'm not necessarily of that mind, but it's very easy to make music now. It doesn't. There isn't a big learning curve, and some people say, well, people are sort of missing. They're missing kind of that work reward relationship that music brings. Now, any instrumental music is going to have that, any instrument. But if you're working with loop based, or you're working with, um, kind of trying to capture a feeling of some sort, it doesn't necessarily have that same learning curve. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. It's just the natural way that a person does something. You capture it, and there it is, and their fingerprint is perfect, and it's exactly right, and there's no practice necessary. In fact, if they practiced it, they would lose it. So I rarely do traditional music education, instrumental instruction. I do have one composition student, and I'm very clear about the laborious nature of sort of traditional style music composition. But I very strongly believe that the only thing that matters with music is what it sounds like. I don't care how you made it. I don't care if it was an accident. I don't care if you dropped your drink on your computer and it made a masterpiece. If it's a masterpiece, great. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. In the same way that if you're like spent 12 years dissecting the, geometry of a dandelion and wrote, a scale based on it and invented 25 instruments and it sounds like shit, then it sounds like shit. I don't care. It means nothing to me. So I'm kind of very much I'm a very libertarian, humanist when it comes to music. All I care about is, does it sound good? Does it feel good in the way that it sounds? And not even necessarily sounds good. Does it sound is it successful in what it's trying to do? If it's trying to sound like trashy punk, and you can tell it's trying to sound like trashy punk, but it's too polished and clean, then it's not working, you know? So
It's
so I
almost like
don't
you
really
can't you
encounter that.
can't force it can't be that forced. If it's really trying to be something, it will naturally get there if you let it. And I think that's an important point. I think maybe we could end on, answering that question a little bit deeper. You said you had an answer for, which is, why does music resonate with us so much?
I had a conversation with a woman many years ago because I was really thinking about this aspect of music, why I love it so much, and why I think in many ways it's one of the main reasons, if there are reasons, but one of the main purposes for human beings is to make music. But I think the reason music can encapsulate a moment is because, and the reason human beings relate to it so deeply is because it's one of the very few forms of art suffer from senescence in the way that music does, which of course means that it dies.
Yep.
It has a lifespan of some sort. And even in the context of trying to imagine music, remember music, experience music, you can't do it without the passage of time. And anything that is so intrinsically connected to the passage of time in some way is a reminder of our senescence. Like we are moving through time to the eventual point where we no longer are observant of it. you know, what happens to our psyche, you know, whatever is up for conjecture. But we stop being able to observe it as we are ourselves. So every time you hear something, every time you hear music, you're actually it's only memory, right? It's only the moment and then the memory of the moment. And you can't stop it. There is no way to do it. You can't pause a little bit of music and say, look how much I love this one part, because it'll just sound like this. Like it's not going to sound like anything, right? The only way you can pause it is on the page. Like that's how you can catch it, right? That's how you can catch it. And I think that's what really draws me to that expression of it, is that you can capture this thing that's uncapturable. But it's not alive, you know. To bring it to life means that it has to happen, and then it has to stop happening. And so because it's always memory, there's inherent sadness to a certain degree. There's a melancholy feeling to it, even if it's super happy, because it's gone. And I think that's a big part in my mind why human beings who are open to that, music moves them in such an intense way, because it's a lot like everything else they experience. It's just a memory.
Yeah, it's almost like, you know, in some ways, draw a parallel to sort of Schrodinger's cat. Like you don't know exactly what's happening until you experience it, until you open the box up. You know, in a lot of ways with music, you know, as a musician, you look at and you can read a page of music. For many people in the world, it's a foreign language until it comes to life for them.
Right.
And they're experiencing it in a very different way than, as you say, than it is on the page. And that's, to me, what makes music and the arts in general, you know, so great, and why I don't ever judge someone else's art, no matter what anyone says, because that's the beauty of art and music, is that it is supposed to be interpreted by your experience and unique to you in that moment. So with that, this is way more than I could have asked for. I could literally go for another couple hours. Like, this is so interesting to me, but I really want to thank you for joining and sharing. I'll leave the last word to you. What is next for you? Where can we find you?
Well, you can find all my music on, the usual streaming places. So that music is always there for listening for folks who are curious. And then as far as performance goes, I'm doing a string of holiday pop shows with an orchestra down in Florida called the Southwest Florida Symphony Orchestra. And I have a Christmas song that's on Spotify too, if you want to check it out. It's now officially over past Halloween. So
That's right.
and then I'm doing a New Year's Eve show with the Santa Barbara Symphony Orchestra. So I did their New Year's Eve show last year, and I was trying to think of a extra musical theme that could connect to New Year's, and so I did a whole show on time. And then this year, although it's going to be a surprise for the people there, I'll let your listeners know. I was trying to think of something that could connect to time, and I could connect to time and kind of like continue with it. And so I am doing a show around the sun.
The ultimate time.
Yeah. Yeah. Which they say we've got like about 4.5 billion more years,
like
they
that.
think. So I think that's pretty good.
That's right.
You should be able to figure something out by then.
That's right. And we'll put up links to where you're at and where to find you and what's next as well. But Andrew, thanks so much for joining. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Cliff. I really appreciate it, man. It was great talking with you.
Yep. You too. Take care, man.
Bye.